Hey folks, how are things? Thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today and taking up some of your evening. Maybe earlier in the day, depending on some. I know on the list we had some users and non-users joining us from the US as well. So welcome everyone. I suppose just to kind of kick things off, Karl O'Brien is my name, and alongside Thomas Gleeson, we're the co-founders of StoreHero. And I suppose the goal for the next 30 or 40 minutes now is to kind of go deep on helping you guys get prepared as either a brand or an agency for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So we've all got a rude awakening. Holidays are over. Everyone's back into the swing of things, and there is some planning on the horizon, I'm sure, is in progress for a lot of people as well. So just to set the scene, so we want to kind of give a little bit of background around what e-commerce looks like today and how that might reflect and apply, I suppose, to Black Friday. From there, we want to kind of go through a couple of key areas that often are maybe some of the foundations that people can often skip by when it comes to kind of Black Friday planning. Building offers, how that applies in terms of your acquisition, conversion, and retention, and also looking at the unit economics, as everyone will know, who have seen our content before. There's a couple of kind of familiar topics, but definitely a lot of new stuff here as well that we're looking to dive into. So, yeah, with that in mind, to kind of kick off and set the scene a little bit, I think this slide is a good representation, I think, of where we often find ourselves today in conversations with e-commerce brands. It's never been easier to start an e-commerce business, but unfortunately, it's never been more difficult to grow that business profitably. Everyone will know, years of cheap customer acquisition costs, cheaper capital meant brands never needed to be as dialed in as they do today in order to grow. And specifically grow profitably. Now, practically the reason why that's occurring is because of their costs, these variable costs. And most brands, for lack of a better alternative, will often use revenue as a daily indicator of success. It's the number that's at the top of your Shopify dashboard. It's something that people can easily put on Twitter and maybe get a little bit of cred for, but realistically, does it actually stand to you? No. Anyone who needs to look any deeper, is accountable at any deeper level, knows that that's not just the case. Now, practically in addition to all these variable costs, there's also their paid advertising spend, which is potentially one of the most variable costs of them all. And everyone will know that as well as those core variable costs, brands and the agencies, by way of the agencies that they're working with, sometimes are spending 10, 20, 30% conservatively of that revenue on paid ads, which again, it's very difficult though whether that's actually profitable or not. So we've seen this problem firsthand. We knew we had to have a cheesy picture in here. Personally, haven't seen this running a digital marketing agency, Effector.ie, over 8 years, saw how data tracking and privacy challenges made it very difficult for brands and ultimately the agencies that they work with to actually understand and work through these problems as well. So, and also I can hand it over to Thomas, my co-founder, who again saw the problem from a slightly different light.
Absolutely. Firstly, thanks everyone for tuning in today. Honestly, really, really appreciate it. Just had a quick check before we came on there. 79 days to Black Friday. It seems like it was March like 20 minutes ago. So the year is just absolutely flying by, but absolutely, Black Friday planning is very much in full flow. As Karl mentioned, I'm co-founder here at StoreHero. My own background, grew up in a family e-commerce business since probably 2004 or 5. So was born into it in a certain extent. Had a couple of small e-commerce brands myself over the years and worked at Shopify as a senior consultant with some of the biggest brands in the UK for about 3.5 years. Really, really great experience. And I suppose, I ran into the same challenges at home running the ads account for my parents' business. Often really struggling to articulate, was I just driving extra revenue for the business or was that revenue actually profitable? In years gone by, as to all the points you've just echoed, kind of, Karl, it might have been that bit easier to just kind of, run your Facebook ads, your Google ads and just have it all work. But the margin for error, just as I'm sure everybody listening is seeing with rising customer acquisition costs, just mean that we're just seeing brands just be much more frugal, I suppose, and much more diligent about making sure that they're driving incremental profitability on a daily basis, as opposed to that just top line revenue number as well.
Definitely, well said. I suppose to kind of put that on the perspective, that really represents the founding story of how StoreHero exists. So for anyone not familiar, we'll keep our pitch within 30 seconds and we can time us as needed. But just to kind of give some context as to how we're trying to solve this problem, in addition to automatically syncing all that sales and marketing data, unlike other tools, we're also pulling in those costs. So the intention is, for the first time, a brand can get a true sense of whether their profit is actually growing or shrinking on a daily basis. Practically, they can eliminate loss-making orders and also promote their most profitable orders. So all this to say, we want to eliminate the guesswork in the Monday morning marketing meeting, whether it's understanding why our kind of marketing metrics don't match up with our finance, or even why our marketing metrics on one channel don't match up with the marketing metrics on another. So plenty of room for confusion. And if we come, I suppose, from a first principles approach, the intention is we're trying to really use profit as that North Star to ensure that not only are we looking at making sound decisions today, but sound decisions that represent, give longevity to the business and make sure, again, we're not naive or, not naive to some of that information that we might get a bit of a shock to the system finding out in a couple of weeks' time, kind of chatting to the accountant.
Maybe just to jump in, sorry, on that one, Karl. I think it's, obviously we're talking about using profit as a North Star. It might be even just worth taking the other side to see what are we seeing brands currently doing. And I think it's replacing profit as the daily indicator of success, as opposed to what we're seeing with a lot of brands when we speak with them is that revenue number, but also using ROAS. Like, so many brands that we're speaking to are just looking at ROAS every day. And, to all your points, we're all seeing double attribution happen across multiple platforms. And that just makes decision making around paid marketing spend so difficult. So again, just bring it back to first principles. Yes, we can look at all the channel level attribution within the platform, but within StoreHero, you're really looking at that profitability lever on a daily basis.
Definitely. To kind of put this in perspective as well, as to, there's a lot of individual tactics. It's taking the overall methodology of maybe looking at your business through a profit first lens. How does this actually transpire in the businesses who do it well and the businesses who don't? So we see how, having, analyzed hundreds and hundreds of stores at this point since we launched early last year, about 12 to 13 million orders now at this point, whereby that's constantly feeding and validating some of the opinions that we're holding more strongly on a daily basis. The brands who really are running their business on a profit first basis, they have a unified view of sales, marketing, and costs naturally. Oftentimes they were doing that through spreadsheets or, obviously a lot more difficult ways to approach the problem in months gone by. Number two is they factor in the cost of advertising into their variable costs. So as we said, if you're kind of looking at taking revenue to a gross profit level, it's certainly an improvement, whereby we're factoring in those product, packing, shipping, transaction fees, costs. But with advertising representing such a large percentage of that P&L, of that average order value, whatever way you want to look at it, that's going to be a really important metric to take into account. From there as well, and everyone will kind of see this to kind of different extents, oftentimes these businesses are profitable by order 2 or 3 maximum. So that's not to say there aren't really successful businesses who can defer that point of profitability. They can spend healthily to acquire a customer and recoup that later on down the road. Now, practically, we see, there's a kind of a cash flow limitation to that. Oftentimes, the businesses who are performing best can kind of not have an outstanding loan against that customer. They're not waiting for them to come back to kind of free up cash within the business. They're able to kind of keep things moving. And from there as well, they're able to drive high margin repeat sales from those customers over time. Now, as well, grounding all of this data, oftentimes they're not operationally perfect, but they've good underlying unit economics. They have the underlying margins to support imperfection, which as an industry with so many variables, that's inevitable. So really looking at, okay, fundamentally, you might not be ticking all these boxes, and don't worry if you're not, but use them to understand where you are in the process, and based on your strengths, how can we double down on those and maybe mitigate against some of the weaknesses as well. So I suppose to kind of bring this kind of into the next stage here around kind of Q4 planning, it's easy enough there's plenty of content online which will talk to you about specific ad types to run and specific emails to send. But critically, I think what often people miss is the first part in terms of defining what they actually want out of Black Friday and Q4 in general. First and foremost, we would always ask people to ask themselves the question, what is your best path to profitability? So ultimately, different business models will need a different approach in order to succeed. The same model and the same approach for one business that are allowed to succeed will cause financial ruin in some cases for another. So explain what I mean by that. Firstly, you're going to have some businesses who need to be profitable on their new customers and their repeat customers. Furniture being an example here. If you're earning €500 profit on an order, you can't be willing to spend €600 on that order and potentially not ever see that customer again. Nearly in that case, you're rewarded disproportionately, or kind of in an opposite paradigm to the quality of your product, and therefore you can't wait until later on to kind of get that repeat purchase. On some situations, people kind of sit in the middle, whereby they can maybe push to be break even on new customers and maybe profitable on those repeat customers. So that allows them to maybe acquire new customers aggressively. Practically what that means is any margin they have on that first order, let's put that directly into marketing. I can afford to spend a higher cost per sale on my ads from new customers, and I know I can have some repeat customers within a reasonable period of time in order to recoup that cost. Thirdly, you might have a situation there where businesses are loss-making on new customers and profitable on repeat. Again, this is a scenario that will work really well for some businesses, but be very detrimental for others. And oftentimes, I suppose a better way to frame it, sometimes we see this as a purposeful strategic decision, but maybe it's a subscription brand. And some situations it's happening to the business because, again, they don't have clarity as to whether they're actually profitable on that first order or not. So again, in that scenario, you need to make sure that there's some not only kind of repeat purchase potential, but that repeat purchase is going to happen quick enough that, again, you're not sitting around tight on cash waiting for those customers to come back in order to be in a good position to actually grow the business. From here as well, we want to kind of take that the next step forward and say, okay, we know as based on our business model, what's our kind of mix between new and repeat customers. We can kind of use that as a foundation. We'll touch on now in a second. Next, I would kind of ask everyone and invite everyone to take a look at what your North Star goal actually is. Plenty of time, it sounds so simple, but everyone is looking at slightly different metrics, especially being finance and marketing. Everyone will know that feeling of communicating with someone on the opposite side of the coin, whatever function you're in. It's a different language, maybe feels like, different time horizons in some cases, and it's hard to kind of marry together a plan. So ultimately, if you have a sense of your overarching goal, we can start to understand, okay, well, realistically, how much should we be willing to pay for a customer based on these strategies? If you're looking to maximize profitability, in that case, you may only be able to afford a low cost per acquisition. You're not willing to give up too much of a cost to the Meta, Google, TikToks of the world, and you want to retain that higher profit per order. You may be willing to actually have a lower overarching revenue number, but from there as well, you can see here on the sales volume side, if you're willing to kind of maybe eat into your profitability a bit, but in return drive your overarching revenue, you'll be willing to pay a bit more for a CPA and maybe tighten up your margin a little bit on those orders. If you're acquiring new customers more aggressively, and you're going back to that previous example, you're trying to invest as much as possible into acquiring that customer, you're going to pay more, but in return as well, you're going to see a lower profit per order. And finally, you might want to clear existing inventory. It's the reality of an industry like e-commerce that, again, sometimes that's an inevitable component we need to look at, and therefore we may need to be willing to pay a bit more because that inventory does more for us as cash rather than sitting in a warehouse taking up space. So one kind of larger point, I suppose, to kind of build on top of these fundamentals is actually looking at, okay, how does this apply for the year ahead? This is definitely one that if businesses aren't aware of this or they don't factor this into their forecasting, they will often kind of go down an incorrect path. The fact that Black Friday is later this year, so it's going to fall on the 29th of November, means that weekend will actually run into December. So what was otherwise maybe a November revenue expectation in 2023 may actually be a December revenue expectation in 2024. So it might be worth adjusting our expectations between those 2 months. Now, broadly speaking, there's also the other dynamics that might take place whereby as that 72-hour Black Friday window is expanded into the month of November, what we're expecting to see is, and Thomas can maybe add to this as well, what we're practically expecting to see is people aren't going to be willing to say, okay, I want to wait to do my sales later on. They're still going to start earlier probably, and that sale period, again, the time in which you're willing to kind of discount maybe have been originally 72 hours, now gone to a month. It's probably even longer than that again. Cool. Thomas, do you want to give any context on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to your point, yeah, I think it's I think last year was Black Friday was the 25th, I think, and while that doesn't sound like a huge difference, when we're in such a condensed buying cycle, and most people listening to this will often do 45% of their revenue in a condensed, often month-long period at the end of the year, and it can be, you can be looking at your budgets and thinking, maybe we're not getting there. Do we need to hit on discounts? Do we need to introduce different kinds of offers and that kind of thing as well? But I would just be, and we'll kind of come on to this in a few minutes, just trying to be as proactive about that offer structure and everything else like that, just months in advance, because you don't want to be coming too reactive and just simply trying to chase revenue goals through a mix of just enhanced advertising spend and discounting to hit different figures coming into the end of the year. So, it is going to be later. Be aware of that and just kind of plan accordingly for the whole month of November.
Definitely. As part of a recent ebook, Jer from Studio 49 gave some really practical advice around how this actually applies across the next couple of months. There's specific techniques and tools that you want to not only prep for to make sure you're prepared, but also as well, I suppose, you're in the weeds of things on a day-to-day basis and making sure they're kind of front of mind as time actually passes through the next couple of weeks and months. So one would definitely recommend, there's plenty of other really good insights around the specific timelines in terms of marketing calendars from really solid contributors, where it's Velstar, plenty, but 20 in total. I know that some of which touch on this marketing calendar piece, so I'd really recommend taking a look at that ebook. There's a link throughout we can maybe actually drop it in the chat as well. There's plenty of really valuable insights to really pull from there. So from there, I'll hand it over to Thomas to actually go into a little bit more detail around how to kind of plan your offers in order to kind of achieve those goals.
Cool. I just actually popped in a link to the ebook directly into the chat there as well. So if anyone wants to get a copy of it, you can just log in there quite quickly. So yeah, next up, we're going to kind of move on to just building your offers and what I was kind of touching on. One thing that can be quite attractive for brands, coming into this time of year is, understanding how much do I need to discount. It's a really hard one to answer. It's a really hard one to answer because every brand is so different, and it really depends on your North Star goals, depending as you're going through just as you're trying to build your offer structure, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, I think we'll just jump on to the next slide there, Karl, if that's okay. Yeah, again, it depends on your goals. So, I mean, one thing to really take into account is that, your discount is not free, in that it is money that you're giving away. And depending, like if you have your target set out that you want to hit X revenue, this amount of customers, this is the average you want to pay for a customer or a CPA, that discount definitely needs to be taken into account when we're thinking about that. Because just to kind of touch on this example here very, very quickly. So this is a brand that we're saying they're planning to do 1 million. Let's just call it 1 million over a 2-month time period. At the very bottom here, what we can see is the contribution margin. So in both cases, they're doing 1 million in revenue, and at the very, very bottom, contribution margin, profit after marketing spend, it's both 150K. Now, where this gets interesting is we can see on the left-hand side, this $1 million revenue, they have introduced a 10% discount, and then the brand on the right, they have no discount applied. So the COGS are the exact same. It's still 45%. So the gross margin on the left-hand side with the discount applied is 50%, and on the right-hand side without the discount, it's 55%. What that ultimately comes down to is the fact that the discount adjusted CPA, we can afford to spend $40 when we don't apply a discount, but to take that into account, we still will need to lower our CPA target if we're planning to introduce a 10% discount down to $30. So again, just making sure that you're taking that into account. Every brand does not need to go hell for leather on discounts coming into Black Friday. Speaking to a lot of brands the last couple of weeks, and some are very interested in doing discounting. Others say they stay completely away from it. Just know what's the fit for your brand. Not every brand needs to go just complete all out. You do need to have some kind of offer there. That does not necessarily need to mean a site-wide discount for everybody as well. So just to kind of touch on that, it's a really, really interesting point. If you are planning to introduce a discount, just be aware that your target cost per acquisition that you're looking for will also need to adjust in tandem with that to make sure that it's valuable for the brand.
Just to kind of add to that as well, I suppose really what we often see there is like people will run campaigns that may eat into their margin, especially if it's a kind of a lower AOV. I know Thomas will touch on this in a couple of minutes. They'll eat into their margin with the discount, and then their cost, the cost per acquisition in some cases is staying pretty much the same. They're not able to acquire customers. Technically it's a better proposition, but if their ads aren't allowing them to actually acquire customers any different, you may have earned kind of maybe €5 more margin on when you discount, or less margin when you discount. But if your CPA goes up by 5 as well, then your net you've made no difference. So really, again, that's probably the benefit of looking at contribution margin or profit after marketing as the North Star to kind of factor both of those components in.
Definitely. I think you've kind of covered off point one there. So yeah, just to kind of say it again, the lower gross profit, i.e. in a discount in some cases, the less you can afford to spend on acquiring that customer. Second one there is watch the discount acquired customer on an LTV of that customer. And what I mean by that is, we're often coming into this time of year, we're going to attract new shoppers. Not all of them will be long-term shoppers for your brand. A lot of them are buying gifts for one-off people that they probably have no intention of ever coming back to your site as well. So just keep in mind that when you are doing a retro, and it probably is worth doing a retro on Black Friday 2023, of the new customers that we acquired during that time period, how loyal were those customers to the brand? Because if you get into a position where you've done a really heavy discount for a whole plethora of new customers who really have no business coming back to you over and over again, that should really inform how aggressive you should be on your discounting strategy as well, because you don't want to be in a position where you're getting to break even acquiring new customers that are just not very likely to come back to you as well. People are in market, they will be looking, they're probably keeping an eye on your brand at this moment. So a lot of the people who are actually a fit for your brand may not be as swayed by discounts as just kind of one-off customers who may not be as loyal to you longer term.
Just to answer one piece there's to jump in on that as well to answer DP's question in the comments there. So how early should Irish brands go with Black Friday offers in 2024? I think there's a hypothetical strategic answer, a philosophical answer maybe we can give, and a practical answer, whereby ultimately, oftentimes, if you're operating in a competitive industry, you have to respond to those competitors. We'll often have seen people whereby they have their campaigns prepped and they go a few days earlier if they feel like comparable brands or competitor brands are doing the same. It's not an ideal scenario, but it's more of a practical scenario. And again, especially compared to looking at maybe where you sit as part of that customer's purchase process, I'd probably look at it as it relates to kind of share of wallet. Customers and consumers may have a certain allocated budget that they want to spend over the Q4 kind of shopping period, specifically Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And practically, if somebody eats into that share of wallet quicker, then you have an opportunity maybe to get an offer, however good it is, in front of them. They're going to be more and more sparingly and maybe more price sensitive or sensitive to actually make that decision, I suppose, as time goes on. So typically what we would always recommend is be ready to go. And then you can make a decision then to say, okay, do I want to push, depending again on my industry, but again, happy to chat a bit more about that on a case by case basis.
And you will need to keep an eye on your competitors as well. If your competitors go earlier, you will be forced, your hand will be forced to a certain extent. A plan is great, but if your competitors all go 2 weeks before you're planning to go, and just deeming, you need to do your own research to understand how elastic are our customers versus our competitor be to a certain extent. If 2 or 3 of your competitors are going that bit earlier, your hand might be forced, but just plan for that in advance, because it's just definitely one to take in mind, because people, to your point, DP are definitely going much earlier in the last couple of years. It's almost turned into Black Month as opposed to Black Friday in some industries. So just something to be mindful of. Next one there is kind of building your offers based on a target AOV. And yes, I mean, we can talk about giving discounts, and it is probably the most widely used tactic in the industry. You can discount in other ways without giving a straight discount, whether it's a cross-sell or an upsell, whereas you're going to sell everything at full price, but buy product X and, get something else half price, or get a free gift with purchase, whatever it's going to be. A lot of brands, for instance, maybe skincare brands might give a free sample or 2 samples with every 50 euro spent or 100 euro spent or whatever it's going to be. That's a really, really good offer, or a really good incentive to kind of drive that average order value much, much higher. And what we can see here is just very, very simply, obviously just kind of simple maths. If a brand does 20,000 orders with an average order value of 50, we're going to get $1 million in revenue. But if we can somehow increase that AOV up to 70, there's a huge, huge difference there in the revenue of the business. And your target CPA that you're probably paying for the customer isn't probably going to rise a whole lot. I've seen some brands really utilize, really good kind of cross-selling and upselling strategies, particularly coming into Black Friday, without going too heavy on the discounts, to just ensure that they are selling items at relatively full price in a lot of instances, but still giving the customer a good offer. So some ideas to consider. So structure your bundles to expose customers to new products. So again, that idea around the sample or different accessories that might go with different products. For instance, if you're an apparel brand, can you sell a belt or a hat, or some product that potentially could be roughly around 20%, 30% of what your typical AOV might be? Really nice upsells and cross sells there at the cart. Third one there would be kind of position your free shipping threshold. So ballpark, we've kind of seen probably in the last year and a half, 20%, having your free shipping threshold set at about 20% over your average order value is a good rule of thumb to be. Obviously, it'll be very different for some industries, but that's probably the closest benchmark I've come across in the last probably 18 months to 2 years looking at brands, and include some kind of loyalty component with VIP offers to differentiate for high value or high repeat kind of customers. So, we don't want to give discounts out to absolutely everybody, but it is a time of year, if you have that kind of real loyal customer base that maybe you're looking to just keep them sweet or whatever it's going to be, we can send those out through highly segmented Klaviyo campaigns or whatever it's going to be, just to give our kind of loyal customer base just an extra little bonus, I suppose, at the end of the year.
Just to kind of bring that a bit full circle then, like ultimately we're really ideally stacking those components on top of each other. We're being very clear as to what our goals are and how aggressive we're going to be in spending on new and repeat customers. From there as well, we're ideally building a cart or an average order value to not only, again, drive more profit on that first order, ideally expose the customer to kind of new products if they're a repeat customer, and ideally lower the kind of foot in the door to the brand as an opportunity where, again, there's a higher propensity to spend and someone can maybe make a decision to purchase that they wouldn't have otherwise. So I suppose they're going to take that to its next stage then. We have our, I suppose, our core goals. We have the offer. Now we have to kind of dive in and ultimately start to acquire new customers using those two components. So as Thomas mentioned near the start, I think typically return on ad spend on a kind of a paid advertising basis is typically the reference point that most brands use as an indicator of success. It's not the worst, and it's certainly kind of an evolution over time. And as compared to maybe time gone by when we're looking at impressions and clicks to kind of indicate success within a campaign, it's certainly getting closer. But at the end of the day, I think people often overextend themselves or potentially undershoot their potential as a business by just using ROAS because it doesn't tell that full picture. So again, just for kind of a layman's explanation, we're really looking at ROAS as the multiplier. So for every €1, $1, £1 I invest in marketing, specifically in paid advertising spend, what's the revenue that I drive back through my store for every €1, £1 spent? So again, on that basis, it's a revenue-based metric. It doesn't really account for any of my order-related costs. Just because of a ROAS of 1, some businesses may need a different. It kind of leads into point 2 there. A good ROAS and a ROAS target on that basis is very different for everyone. Businesses who have tighter margins need a higher return on every dollar they spend in order to even pay their bills, let alone other businesses who can afford to keep on spending even if the ROAS is the same. For example, a ROAS of 1.7 as an example is maybe potentially really profitable for some businesses and unprofitable for others. Also, high ROAS is definitely often more difficult to achieve in most cases, especially as compared to years gone by, whereby everyone, again, even just taking the kind of COVID example as a reference point, in what situation would you have such a massive influx of people consuming social media content, viewing ads, having discretionary income to spend? If that's your benchmark that you're trying to reach, and you think that's the only pathway for success in the business, there's an easier way to approach it. I'm sure you'll be happy to know. You don't need to achieve that high ROAS, because again, that high ROAS may be a missed opportunity. You may be better off actually spending more with a lower return, drive more orders with more orders. Even if the profit per order is lower, we're accumulating more profit overall. So
just to jump in there as well, because like I think ROAS was like, it was everybody's primary North Star metric for a while, including my own years ago when I would have been running ad accounts. And I often struggled to get more budget because I wasn't able to speak to the finance person in a language that they understood, which was profit. They never trusted ROAS metrics because they didn't understand them a lot of the time. And I think that's only been more compounded in the last couple of years due to privacy changes and everything else like that. We're just seeing that, the metrics that we're all getting from Facebook and Google are just much, much more unreliable. And that just makes decision making around paid marketing budget much, much more tricky for brands. And particularly if you're looking for more budget for your e-commerce brand, whether you're an agency or you're running a brand, it's getting more increasingly difficult to just simply rely on return on ad spend metrics from these platforms without understanding the true kind of incremental uplift in profitability in tandem.
100%. I think a lot of agencies and maybe media buyers will find this, where again, there's a constant battle on a daily basis to actually look at spend and return on ad spend to try to find the optimal point, which again is very difficult to do because you don't know what's actually driving the most profit as a combination. There's also a pressure to keep ROAS as high as possible, with maybe through a level of fear, to be honest, and a lack of, a level of uncertainty. Well, let's make, higher is better. Let's just keep it there. But again, as we said, that's practically maybe a limiting factor. And I suppose thirdly, then there's less data to kind of back up recommendations to clients or maybe to business owners, whoever it is. Practically, if there's a language to put against this, it means that instead of saying, I think we should spend more, I think it might be profitable, if there's a clear metrics we can use as a reference point, it always makes those conversations a lot easier. And really what we see here is the opportunity. And if we know, and we can be certain in our conversations to business owners, e-com managers, clients, that there's enough left over from every order after all of our cost of goods, after marketing, everyone is happy. And again, this really represents contribution margin. In another term, if you're not sick of hearing us talking about it already on LinkedIn, is going to be your gross profit after marketing spend. So on that basis, we know we're covering all those product packing, shipping, transaction fees, discounts, returns, and advertising spend. And then again, also that ad spend at the last component being really important. So just to flag this and maybe take this offline for anyone who wants to kind of speak more about it, we do have a free tool on our website, a break-even return on ad spend calculator, whereby you can input your actual cost and know, okay, what's the exact return on ad spend I need in order to make sure I'm not only covering my kind of ad spend cost, but all those other costs as well. This kind of maybe ties up some of this kind of conversation and these components as well around, how do I kind of represent this for, again, whoever it is, maybe people in my organization or potentially my clients if I'm on an agency side. Let's just take a couple of examples here. So you can see in this scenario here, let's say these are all kind of sample spends on a monthly basis. This business, when they spend 10K, they get 7.5x return on ad spend. That generates 75K in revenue, and assuming a 65% gross profit margin, that leaves 45K in gross profit within that business. Okay, that's a good indicator. And then from there, my gross profit after marketing, i.e. contribution margin, so 45 minus our 10, leaves us 35K in gross profit after marketing in this scenario. As you can see, as I spend more, my return on ad spend actually falls. As expected, Facebook and Google and Instagram and TikTok have to do more and more work to try to find customers, and potentially can't get as much of a return with a bigger budget, but they'll still give you a return. Here you can see the revenue is going up, and also the contribution, even though the ROAS is falling, the contribution margin or profit after marketing is still rising. So therefore, I'm better off continuing to spend. Now, there is that kind of tip of the ceiling, the tip of the curve, whereby after I keep on spending, it's actually no longer as worth my while. I go from a position whereby I can spend 100K and generate 200K in profit. But if I spend any more, those additional incremental orders are potentially unprofitable, and therefore my profit pile is falling. And on that basis, I'm maybe better off, if I'm looking for profitability as my North Star, that's maybe not as much of a reference point I want to look at. So just to speak to, again, how this actually applies in the StoreHero context, our StoreHero Spend Advisor will ultimately answer this question for you, show you on a daily basis, okay, how is your advertising spend moves? And rather than just using that sales number within Shopify, we can actually show you and give you an insight around whether that additional spend or decreased spend is actually resulting in more or less profit. So therefore you can know I'm scaling responsibly, my profit is still increasing, and then once I get to that point, I can maybe stop spending. So just to kind of talk through a couple of different scenarios here, we can see here in this situation, this business spent less, potentially we're driving unprofitable orders, and therefore their profit went up, and therefore, they had previously hit a ceiling, and they've prevented some overspending. We've given that insight within the platform. Here's another scenario whereby the marketing spend went up, but then again, potentially we're driving more of those unprofitable orders, so then the profit went down. So again, this is an important one there, that naturally you want to maybe pull your spend back. And then thirdly as well, this situation whereby the business increased spend dramatically, nearly 4x spend. And even though our kind of efficiency, every $1 we invested in marketing, or €1 in this context, generated less of a return, or generated much more orders with a better profit per order. So therefore my profitability increased 30%. So again, that's nearly impossible to see it is impossible to see within a Meta ads account, within a Shopify ads account, Shopify account. So therefore, seeing that unified view through the lens of profitability gives a much better view of your data. One contribution as well from our ebook in the last week or so was Brandon from Wolfgang Digital, one of the larger kind of Google Premium partners based in Ireland, and he made a very valid point around building your strategy around new customer acquisition. Naturally, there's got to be a higher propensity to purchase from repeat customers. They're the people who already trust you, and therefore with that kind of share of wallet that we spoke about, they're going to want to maybe dedicate that budget towards people they already know and trust. But is that really worth their while? Ideally, we want to also reduce the barrier to entry for our new potential customers to actually, in this time where people have a higher propensity to spend, can we actually come out of this not only by kind of selling, preaching to the converted per se, but actually build our audience and use it as an activity and a time of the year, a campaign that stands to us year long. So we often recommend people look at the likes of your new customer acquisition cost, or the other side of the coin, not only how much I'm spending, but I suppose what's the profit you're generating on the first order, new customer contribution margin. So therefore, instead of relying on what any individual Meta ads, Google ads, TikTok ads account is saying, they don't know who's a new customer and repeat. If we can, as we do with StoreHero, come to that data on a first principles basis, look at your total marketing spend and look at how many new customers you've actually acquired to get a truer sense of, okay, how much, not only how much is it taken to drive an order from an existing customer, but how expensive has it been to acquire that new customer as well. So from there, we can hand it over back to Thomas on the profitable retention side. We've acquired those customers, and then we want to make sure, again, we're retaining them effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even in years gone by, and how this segment maybe has changed, in that, we've kind of touched on it a couple of times in years gone by when, customer acquisition costs were much, much more expensive. I think the retention side of the coin probably got neglected for a lot of brands because of the fact that you could just consistently acquire loads of new customers on an ongoing basis and not care about retention. But it wasn't as much of a major decision for the brands because of the fact that the new customer acquisition was so strong. So maybe just to jump on to the next slide there, what we can see here is the kind of, obviously going into Q4, I suppose, particularly around Black Friday, email is going to be a huge component of what your Black Friday retention strategy looks like. I'm not going to go into all of it. We actually got a lot of extremely good contributors to the ebook. Again, so anyone who hasn't downloaded it yet, I would take a look at it. We've got some really, really good contributors in there who, put in some fantastic kind of contributions on the email marketing side of things. So would definitely recommend checking out those. But one to maybe just jump onto there on the next one was actually a guy called John Snow, who I did a podcast with quite recently. Email segments. I mean, there's so many different ways, particularly as we come into crunch season, to who am I actually segmenting? What types of customers within my existing Klaviyo, Shopify, setup am I actually looking to kind of target, I suppose, really. John has given some really, really good examples that we just pulled out here before we jumped on that I think could be really, really helpful. So The couple of them I'm just going to run through here is the non-engaged subscribers that have not yet purchased, obviously between kind of the heavy season. So these are people that, that haven't really, maybe these are people that you might hit with a bigger discount because for whatever reason they haven't been engaged with the brand. We want to just, use whatever data that we have to kind of convert who we have, even if they haven't really been too engaged. Second one there is a separate segment for engaged customers. So non-VIP subscribers who have not yet purchased. So people who have purchased more than 2 times, but who have not yet maybe purchased in the given time period yet. And the third one there is the kind of engaged VIP subscribers who have not yet purchased. So this cohort should convert to purchasers at the highest rate. And again, this is where the biggest kind of level, I suppose, of low-hanging fruit stands out for brands. Again, there's so many different types of different segments that we should be setting up going into Q4. And John has really nicely laid out 3 or 4 of them there. And as I said, there's loads within the ebook that I would definitely recommend kind of just diving into in a little bit more detail. Again, new customer acquisition is not going south from a price perspective anytime soon. So just making sure that we're doing the most with what data that we have is just never more important than ever. Next one there, we're going to jump onto, so you're already on it there, the kind of LTV. So making sure that we're looking at LTV on a gross profit basis. And maybe just to take the opposite side in that, not just revenue. So many brands that we're speaking to when we talk about LTV, they're simply measuring, how many times a customer comes back divided by the average order value. And this is our LTV. It's not, because if you have a brand that's doing a brand that's, say, over the course of 12 months, the average customer spends, I don't know, €1,000. If your brand has a 30% gross margin, you really only have a gross profit on that customer over the 12-month time period of €300. And now if you have a brand that's doing 70% gross margin, that's 700. If you're simply looking at revenue, both of those brands have €1,000 lifetime value over the course of 12 months, when in fact they're very, very different businesses. When we start to strip out product cost, packing, shipping, transaction, return fees, all those marginal costs that will apply every single time a customer places an order. So some pointers on LTV. So consider what kind of time period do you actually want to measure LTV in. Again, Karl, you touched on at the start of the webinar here, just around furniture brands. Depending, you could be the best marketer in the world. If you're selling mattresses online, you are not going to convince somebody to buy 12 mattresses a year. Well, if you do, I'd like to hire you, but I'm doubt you will be able to do that. Whereas if you're a brand, so maybe like if you're measuring LTV for a furniture brand, you want to do it in a 5-10 year time horizon. Whereas if you're selling, I don't know, subscription toothpaste, for example, your customers are likely probably going to come back to you every 30 days. So, you're probably going to measure that LTV on a 12-month, 6-month basis, whatever it's going to be. It'll be very, very different depending on the average buying cycle of your customers, is really what I'm trying to say. Limited growth or LTV in the first product. So you may need to be profitable on first purchase. Kind of ties into point 1, to be honest with you. If you are that toothpaste brand and your customer comes back every month and you're quite confident in that, you can probably push profitability out to month 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it's going to be. Build that big bank of new customers in the confidence that they are going to keep coming back to you. And after month, whatever it's going to be, 3, 4, you're starting to generate profit from the repeat customers that they have. Whereas if, again, with that furniture brand, if you're not going to recoup the cost of that investment for 4 or 5 years, you really need to be first order profitable. There's no 2 ways about it. Third one there is high growth LTV within a 1 to 3 month period. Maybe you can be more aggressive in acquiring new customers. Again, just to that point, like a lot of brands that we're working with are striving to be first order profitable, and in a lot of instances they are. But often I can get frustrated, or it's frustrating to see that they actually have a really, really high repeat purchase rate within the first 1 to 3 months. And yes, they are first order profitable, but if they could actually just spend a lot more, build that bank of new customers up, and actually try and push profitability out, even 1-2 months, obviously cash flow dependent, they could be a much, much bigger business overall. And yes, first order profitability is great, but it's not always the best strategy either. So yeah, just take note of that. And I suppose the last one there is look at your Q4 data for last year. When did they come back? And I suppose one other thing to add in there is, not just did they come back, but really looking at last year's data to understand, as we look at November and December, if we were applying discounts, did the gross profit on first purchase dip in tandem with the discounts? And actually in tandem with that, did our customer acquisition costs in those months fluctuate as well? Because, maybe you're on average generating €25 per customer on first order, and your typical customer acquisition cost could be 20. maybe in Q4 you give a 20% discount and it's down to €20 gross profit on first purchase, but your customer acquisition cost halves. In that instance, fantastic. We know we have license to spend way more because we're generating much more profit per new customer coming on board. And the last one there is make sure to account for returns. Again, not applicable for every single business, but if you're in the apparel industry, I was speaking with a brand during the week who has pretty much a 50% returns rate. It's just they do kind of specialized shoes and the customer needs to try them on essentially first. Facebook ROAS will not account for your returns. So when you're looking at your LTV, make sure that you're factoring your returns into the mix, because it's such a huge cost center and profit center for your business that could be getting lost. Think about your return strategy. We're working with the brand at as another kind of software vendor called Swap at the moment. And really what they're trying to push is that you really try and push your customers to swap their product as opposed to just issuing a straight return or refund. So just there is other ways to do it than simply just issuing refunds consistently. Second one there is to keep in touch with customers after they buy. Again, just trying to improve that NPS score. Number 3, watch out for customers who return too many things. These are customers who you'll probably want to exclude from your email marketing, from your new acquisition campaigns. Allow a longer time for returns as well. And the last one there is probably tied into the first one there, in just different strategies as opposed to just simply giving out refunds all the time. Offering gift cards and reward points for returns instead of just simply a refund will definitely positively impact the profitability of the business in such a busy time of the year.
Great. There we go. So I suppose from everyone's, again, appreciate everyone's interest and taking the time, especially into the evening for most. One thing I'd really recommend is everyone to take a look. Again, we've given a link there, no opt-in required, is to grab a copy of our Q4 playbook. So this is really, we've consolidated, I suppose, contributions from 20 e-commerce experts globally, both brands, agencies, industry leaders who ultimately see this stuff on a daily basis and have practical advice rather than the kind of cookie cutter stuff that we were eager to kind of build on top of our own content we even released last year, and we'll continue to do that into the future. To finish, again, it wouldn't be a StoreHero webinar without a little bit of a sales push at the end. So would recommend that everyone take a look at our free trial. So we've actually recently opened this up where everyone can now kind of sign up and actually get going with an account themselves. Have a look at the data. You can answer all these questions yourself. Whether you talk to us or not, whether you go ahead or not, you'll get a free profitability audit and be able to make these decisions as to whether you're actually growing with profit in mind. You will make different decisions having that extra information. And again, better to know it now than get a shock to the system in a couple of months' time. So as we're welcome up, you're welcome any other questions as we kind of finish up. But thanks everyone, thanks Kira for sticking around. And yeah, sure, look, one thing we'll do as well, I suppose there's a link there in the chat to sign up for the free trial. It takes about 5 minutes to kind of initially get connected, connect your channels, and within a couple of hours that data will start to sync through and we can kind of run through a free audit. So yeah, thanks everyone. Really appreciate the time and looking forward to speaking again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks guys.